Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be joined by a globally recognized leader in the fields of natural health and Ayurveda, as well as sports medicine. Our guest is the creator of what is known as LifeSpa.com, the leading Ayurvedic health and wellness resource on the web with more than 5 million views on YouTube. LifeSpa.com is evolving the way Ayurveda is understood around the world with over 800 articles and videos providing ancient wisdom with more modern science. He is also the director of the player development and nutrition expert for the New Jersey Nets NBA team, best-selling author of 7 health books, a repeat guest on Dr. Oz, and featured in USA Today, LA Times, and dozens of other nationally publications. His newest book is Eat Wheat. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. John Douillard. Dr. John, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Daniel. Good to be here.
You know, this is one of those things that seems to be an epidemic when you hear people going out to restaurants saying, I'm gluten intolerant, so you need to adjust everything everybody's doing so I could eat here. What's going on with all this?
Well, I think it's a very real thing that people, when they eat gluten, they actually don't feel wonderful. And the only concern is wheat and dairy, for that matter, are they really the causes of why they feel bad, or is there an underlying factor? Because the science is pretty amazing that whole wheat versus refined wheat is actually quite healthy for you. People think that wheat causes diabetes, but in study after study after study, whole wheat has been shown to reduce the risk of diabetes. People think it causes Alzheimer's. Study after study shows that whole wheat actually reduces the risk of Alzheimer's by 53% with the Mediterranean diet, which is 2 servings of whole wheat, whole grain per day. In the Mind diet, 3 servings of whole wheat, whole grain per day reduce the risk of Alzheimer's by 54%. So, and there are studies showing that whole wheat will actually help people lose weight. So there's science, and that's why I wrote Eat Wheat, because there's so much science on the other side of the aisle that nobody's hearing about. And when you take a refined processed wheat, it is very much indigestible, and it will cause a level of indigestion. And that's not just the wheat, but it's all the processed foods that have broken down our digestive system. In particular, there are area around the liver and the gallbladder. The number 1 abdominal surgery in America today, gallbladder surgery. So because of the processed foods and the preservatives in the food, particularly vegetable oils that are bleached and deodorized to make the stuff stay on the shelf longer, they are very much indigestible for us. They congest our liver and the gallbladder, and they definitely cause indigestion. So that when you start eating harder to digest foods, you can't do it, you blame the food, but we don't really realize that the real problem is something deeper, something more insidious that's been brewing for 60 years when they took cholesterol out of our diet and they put these refined, bleached, deodorized omega-6 vegetable oil fatty acids in the foods as preservatives, as replacements for the cholesterol. And it was a really, really bad idea, and we're digging out of it today.
Now, you talk about how wheat pretty much was somewhat necessary in our diet, years and years ago. I mean, we've actually had this regularly as well as dairy, and that we've actually developed these intolerances now. And I would have to agree with you that I think it is the breakdown of the digestive system as they're discovering more and more, especially with the mind-gut connection. And having or creating a healthy digestive system that it actually balances a whole lot of things in the body, doesn't it?
Well, you're absolutely right, Daniel, and there's some really interesting science that's coming down the pike. Recently, just last week, a study was published where they took over almost 200,000 people over 30 years, and they found that the people who ate the most gluten in their diet had significantly less type 2 diabetes risk, and compared to the people who actually ate the least amount of gluten had an increased risk of diabetes risk. So all of a sudden we're seeing science that says that gluten, believe it or not, is actually good for you. In one study they showed that people who actually were gluten-free compared to people who ate wheat, the people who were gluten-free had 4 times the level of mercury in their blood than people who ate wheat. They had another study, they had less good bugs and more bad bacteria in their gut than people who ate wheat. And in another study, they found that people had less killer T cells, a measure of immunity, than people who ate wheat. And all this suggests that, we've been eating wheat, believe it or not, for the University of Utah found evidence that they had in the teeth of ancient humans 3.5 million years ago, that people were eating, barley and wheat, glutinous grains, millions of years ago. So we have millions of years of genetics to eat these foods and handle the anti-nutrients, the hard-to-digest components of wheat. And those have become immune triggers for us, and there's good science to back that up. So when you just take out all the stuff that's hard to digest that triggers our immune system, same thing we do with our microbiome, just kill every bug we can see, that created real problems, and we're digging out of that today, and now we're on the verge of the $16 billion a year gluten-free industry giving us processed foods in replacement, and telling people to take all the hard-to-digest stuff out of the diet because I know you don't feel good when you eat it, not fix the digestive problem, and give you processed foods in replacement, which are the thing that got us in this mess in the first place. Is just sort of like, a little bit insane, really,
Mm-hmm. I know, it's funny how they do things like that. They switch it out, and then they give you the reason that you should be doing it is because they created the problem in the first place, it seems like.
Exactly. It's so true, yeah.
Sort of like the tobacco industry decided to start buying up food companies. Okay, you got us that cigarettes are addictive, so why don't we just go and make the food addictive instead? Now, you talk about in the book that when people actually try to go on these diets where they eliminate gluten out of their repertoire, if you will, and dairy as well, that they feel better, but it's generally temporary.
Right, and that's the thing. That's what I noticed 30 years ago when I got into practice. People would get typically, you feel digestive concerns, take the wheat, dairy out of your diet, they get better, but 3-4 months later they come back and the problem would come back, and tell them to get off of soy and some other nuts or seeds, and they'd get better, and then the problem would come back. And it was very clear that we were just kicking the problem down the road by actually taking foods out of the diet, and we have to reboot digestive strength. So what I help people do in the book is help people troubleshoot exactly where their digestive problem, lies, and most of it starts in the gallbladder because that's from the processed foods and the cooked vegetable oils that they use as preservatives to extend shelf life. Those things have really directly congested liver gallbladder function. The bile in the liver is like a Pac-Man, gobbling up toxins and chemicals, buffering the acid in your stomach. And, of course, you don't have any bile. It's super congested in there, which happens to so many people, even without symptoms, in fact. But without really good bile buffers for the acid, the stomach over time will stop producing the acid, and therefore you won't break down the hard-to-digest proteins. They'll go undigested into your intestinal tract and cause irritation, inflammation, and where they actually go is they go into your lymph system instead of your blood because they're too big for the blood now because they weren't digested properly, and they congest your lymph, and the lymph drains your brain of 3 pounds of toxic chemicals every year while you sleep at night, and that causes brain fog and all the brain issues. It goes out through your skin, through skin-related lymph, which causes rashes and hives, and it pushes around the lymph around your belly and gives you belly fat. So those are all the symptoms we see of wheat-related symptoms, but the reality is they're due to poor digestion. So we help people troubleshoot and then fix and repair and reboot their digestive systems.
Now, let's talk about the benefits of having wheat back into your diet, as well as dairy, for instance.
Well, wheat has been shown in study after study to be a natural probiotic and a natural prebiotic. So when you eat wheat, whole wheat, it has tons of fiber in it that actually lower the risk of diabetes, lower the risk of obesity, and they feed your microbiome in a massive way. There's actually what are called glutenases in your intestinal tract. Literally, there's microbes in your mouth, stomach, small and large intestine that are literally engineered to break down wheat, specifically the hard-to-digest components of wheat, and deliver that wheat, and particularly the fiber in wheat, as bug food to rebuilding a healthy, robust microbiome. And that's where 80% of your immune system lives inside of your gut. And the studies are pretty clear that the wheat provides a powerful boost for that. That's why when the people had a gluten-free diet, they had more mercury in their blood by 4 times because they didn't have the natural irritants that trigger an immune response. So there's so many things that wheat does. When you think of whole grains have been a part of our diet for millions of years. If people say, oh, no, we've only been eating wheat for 10,000 years. Well, no, we started hybridizing wheat for 10,000 years. And here's the interesting thing. When they first started hybridizing wheat, they were like, they would thresh the wheat, bang it on the ground, and try to get the wheat berries to come off. And they were needles-like, small, really small. So they want them to be bigger so they could see them and not lose them in the dirt. So they selected for wheat that was bigger, the bigger grains. And when they did that, the original hybridization was for more sugar and less gluten, because the bigger the grain, the more sugar it had and the less gluten. So the original hybridization of wheat was not for more gluten. It was actually for less gluten and more sugar. So the wheat that we ate for millions of years prior to that had much, much more gluten in it than we first started hybridizing it, which is sort of interesting. We always blame gluten, but it's not the problem. And now we have science this week was published saying that people who ate the most gluten had the lower risk of diabetes, and the people who ate the least had the highest.
Now, you see, there's where science to me is kind of silly, because it seems like you can take science and prove anything you want to. I'm going to set out and I'm going to prove that gluten's bad for you, and I'm going to find all kinds of studies and come to that conclusion, and now they come back around and they say, well, if you eat wheat, it's going to lower the possibility of diabetes, things like that. And so it's kind of like, where do you start believing any of it?
Well, there is no science that says that whole wheat increases diabetes. That's the funny thing about this. There's no science to suggest that whole wheat actually increases the risk of diabetes. The science shows, and it's very weak actually, says that processed foods and refined foods, and therefore processed white bread, will actually have a higher glycemic index, and therefore because it has a higher glycemic index, it was then sort of assumed that it automatically would act like sugar and cause Alzheimer's and diabetes and blood sugar problems and weight gain problems. But the science doesn't show it, which is why in my book I have over 600 scientific references to prove that, hey guys, what are we doing here? Because we're not really following the science. We're following what I did 30 years ago. I said, hey, you're gaining weight, feeling bad, bloating, all these problems. Take wheat out of your diet. You feel better. It must be the wheat. Well, yeah, but then quickly I found out that wasn't actually the trait. That wasn't actually the cause. I was just treating the symptoms. And but you're right. I agree with you that science is something that you can prove anything you want depending on who's funding the study. And that's why what I do at my website at lifespa.com is I take ancient wisdom, stuff that's been around for 100,000 years or so, and then find the science to prove it. And I feel like if something has been done for thousands of years in traditional cultures, and we have science to prove it, I feel like we should at least look at that. I'm not going to say it's gospel, but we should at least look at that because we have some time-tested, wisdom there. Then we have science, way better than just science alone, because they can, like you said, prove anything they want.
Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to reintroducing wheat, if people decide they want to move that direction, how do they go about deciding to do this? Obviously, the first thing is get your digestive system in balance. What are a couple of things that you would suggest people can get started with to do that?
Well, a couple of things. One, navigate around the processed food. So when you make bread, for example, all you really need is wheat, water, and salt. So your bread should say organic whole wheat, water, and salt, maybe an organic starter. And bread like that can take up to 3 days to make from beginning to end. The bread on the grocery store shelf has a litany of ingredients you've never heard of. The thing to avoid, really, really avoid, and look at labels, is any type of vegetable oil, canola oil, sunflower oil, expeller pressed oil of any kind, organic or not. Don't eat it, because if they put it in the oven and they cook it, it's rancid and indigestible. So those are the preservatives that extend the shelf life. So you want to look for bread that's really simple. Sprouted bread, sourdough breads are very, very easy to digest. And one study showed a good sourdough bread can lower the bacteria in the bread can gobble up the gluten and render the bread literally gluten-free. So that's something for folks to get started with. But then also, what I give in the book is a troubleshooting guide to help people understand where they went wrong. And I would say, let's start with your liver and your gallbladder and start to decongest that, because that's the thing that's been under the guns for the last 60 years. And that's taking things like beets and apples and celery. These are what are called cholagogues. Cholagogues increase the flushing and the cleansing of your liver and your gallbladder and help you make better bile. And the more bile you have, the more stomach acid you can have. The more stomach acid you have, the better you can digest hard-to-digest foods. And the more bile you have, the better you move your bowels. That's what regulates your bowel function. So beets and apples and celery, you can have that as a juice in the morning, is a great way to start the day. Fenugreek tea is a cholagogue that contracts your gallbladder by 75%. Turmeric contracts your gallbladder by 50%. Artichokes are a fantastic bile flow agent. Now, once you get the bile moving, you want to turn the stomach fire back on, and there's 5 spices that do it supernaturally, which is ginger, cumin, coriander, fennel, and cardamom. So those 5 spices have been used for thousands of years, And there's really amazing science on each of them. But together, when you put all those 5 together, there's this magic kind of synergistic thing that happens where they start to work into reboot digestive strength. In fact, what they do, and the science shows, they increase the production of your own bile. So they don't make bile for you. They help your body make bile better. They help you make your stomach acid better, make you make duodenal and pancreatic enzymes better. So you get better, make your own enzymes, digestive strength increases, and get off these spices so you don't become dependent on another pill or a powder. Like instead of taking a digestive enzyme or a probiotic for the rest of your life, we start to reboot function. And that's really the goal, is always been my goal with my patients, is to get them so they cannot be stuck on a pill or a powder for the rest of their life,
Now, one of the concerns you hear people voicing quite a bit, too, is that of one Monsanto and the idea of the genetically modified organism, especially when it comes to things perhaps such as wheat. Tell us about that. Is that really true?
Well, no, and yes and no. There's 2 things. One, there is no commercially marketed genetically modified wheat. They did do some test crops 10, 15 years ago, and there are a handful of rogue crops, genetically modified, wheat plants that pop up here and there. But the wheat that we eat every day is not genetically, modified at all. However, they in some cases you have to be aware of, they spray glyphosate, Roundup, on the wheat at the end of the season to kill it, and it's a desiccant. It literally kills the wheat and increases their yield and their harvest. So, but you can avoid that by making sure you eat organic wheat, which is really, really important. But at the end of the day, Daniel, there are so many pesticides on so many of our foods, and the pesticides have been shown in study after study to kill the microbes that make the enzymes that help us digest everything, including hard-to-digest things like wheat. So we have to do everything we possibly can to strengthen our digestive system and reboot it. And the first thing to do there is to take the stuff that is completely indigestible out of your diet, which is the processed foods. We really need to demand whole foods again. That's what we got here in an evolutionary ancestral sense by eating whole foods. We are now been fed packaged food that sits on shelves for months and months and months, and that stuff is just, in the long run, it's causing a lot of indigestion, chronic disease, obesity, diabetes, and depression. All those are linked to the inability to deliver fats as a natural source of fuel. And as a result of that congestion of the liver and the gallbladder to deliver the fats, we start craving sugar. And that's what we love. And, of course, the extreme response to that is a paleo diet, which is just, meat and vegetables in an extreme sense, which is also not a sustainable diet. It's more of a starvation diet, and you can stay on it for a while. But, historically, our ancestors did, in fact, eat carbohydrates. They did, in fact, eat starches, and they definitely did, in fact, eat grains. Otherwise, 2 million years ago, we evolutionarily created a gene to help us make our own amylase about 2 million years ago. The only reason why we would start making our own amylase is because we were eating a lot of starch, because that's what amylase does. In fact, specifically wheat. So we definitely 2 million years ago or so started eating a lot of starch. And we genetically adapted the ability to make our own amylase, and that's sort of proof that starch was in our diet. You can't ignore that. We were not wonderful hunters. The amount of meat that they ate wasn't 3 times a day. There's no way that they had that much meat. It was
my understanding they were actually having meat, but it was more in celebration. It was in very small amounts, just for the reasons you're saying.
Yeah, it wasn't tons of meat like the paleo folks were trying to tell us we should eat. Yeah.
Well, and it's important for people to understand, when they hear the term wheat. Now, how do we know about navigating in the right direction with wheat? Because, obviously people will buy breads or they'll buy flour that's generally processed and bleached. How do we move in the right direction when we decide to select to bring wheat back into our diet?
Well, I think, whole wheat, luckily, in America actually does mean the whole wheat, that all the components of the wheat are there together. However, that wheat can be easily processed. So like I said before, look at the ingredients, make sure it has whole organic, whole wheat, water, and salt. That's all you really need, and maybe a starter. That's all you really need. Sprouted breads, sourdough breads. Many of the really good breads are in the refrigerated sections in the supermarket because they go bad. That's what bread should do. Stuff that needs to be refrigerated is good because Otherwise, it would go bad. If you process it and it can stick on a shelf for a month and it doesn't go bad, that's a sign you shouldn't be eating it because your microbes won't eat it. So the refrigerated section is a good place to go. And also, artisan bakeries are popping up. Most health food stores now have bakeries, and if you look at the ingredients, you can find one or two of their breads that are just wheat, salt, and water with no cooked vegetable oils to make it squishy. Everybody likes squishy bread, but good bread is squishy for a day, and then it gets hard, so you buy what you need for the day, and then right now, the other piece of this puzzle, Daniel, is seasonal. There's enzymes like amylase are cyclical. They increase inside of us in the fall and the winter, and they decrease inside of us in the spring and the summer. Well, wheat was harvested in the fall for winter eating for millions of years, and so we have an enzyme that increases to help us digest it in a cyclical circadian way. So start thinking, God, it's spring right now. I should be eating spring spinach salads and leafy greens and sprouts and berries and lighter foods during this season. Heavier foods in the winter when we're harvesting nuts and seeds and soups and stews and more wheats and grains and more meat at that time of the year. And in the summer, more fruits and vegetables. So the circadian understanding that our microbes change from season to season to season has been well documented now, that the bugs in the soil change from season to season, the bugs on the plants change from season to season, and we should be thinking about eating foods in a more seasonal way.
It's always good to have someone like yourself who can come on the program and talk about the simplicity of things that really seems reasonable compared to what we're seeing more of the information out there that really confuses the issue to where before you know it, we're just being led blindly, it seems, to make decisions that really don't have a beneficial effect on our health as much as we think they do.
That's why I love studying ancient principles of medicine, because they're based on logic, and they do it.
They've worked for a while,
right? For 1,000 years, you got to go. Wait a minute, after antibiotics, they're going to be 100 years old in 2030, and we're wondering if they're going to make it to their 100th birthday. It'll be close. But other therapies have been around historically for thousands of years, and that wisdom is lost. And so I try to bring the science and the wisdom together, and it makes a lot of sense. In one study, they found deer, for example, talking about eating in season. They eat bark in the winter, and they have enzymes for bark in the winter, or microbes for bark in the winter. But they have leaves in the summer that they eat, and they have different microbes in the summer for eating leaves. But if they ate bark in the summer where they had the wrong microbe, it could cause such a level of indigestion it could literally kill the deer. And I was like going, wait a minute, deer die when they eat out of season? And we have no idea what is in it or out of season, for the most part. And we eat the same foods all year long. So I wrote a book called The 3-Season Diet, which is all about eating in season, but didn't really make a dent in anybody eating in season. So I put out a grocery list and a recipe list and a superfood list for every single month of the year of what's in season in April, what's in season in May and June, and you get it for free. It's called the 3-Season Diet Challenge. Anybody can sign up for it for free. It's an amazing body of knowledge and information you get for free to just remind you, hey, this is some recipes for April, and here's some recipes for May, and here's a grocery list for April and May. And go out there and start getting reconnected to the local farmer and to what's actually in season. You can get that at lifespot.com. It's called the 3-Season Diet Challenge right on the homepage.
I was just recently watching a documentary called The C Word, which is about cancer, and they were showing in this documentary how there are 4 things that people can do that are relatively simple that could actually prevent and even fight off cancer. And it was really pretty amazing to realize just how simple these things were. And one of the things they were talking about, as we're on the subject about food, is that typically when people go into the supermarket, you rarely see them shopping around the outside of the market. It's usually down the middle in the aisles. And I thought to myself, well, that's strange. I'm very rarely down the aisles. I'm always on the outside. That's the first place I go. So I would think that would be one of the first steps. The second step is buying things in season, as you were suggesting. Well, how would we know that? Well, generally the prices are lower because they're trying to move those items before they go bad.
And the outside has refrigerators. That's why.
Exactly.
That's exactly why you do that, because the stuff will go bad if it's not refrigerated. And that's a good indicator that we should be eating it. It's so simple, really, right?
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Now, this is certainly an informative book that I encourage people to pick up, because you do really hear a lot of parroting. People are just parroting information. And then what evidence do you have? Well, I heard it on this. I mean, they don't really back it up with any kind of research or any kind of reading any way, shape, or form. They just heard it from someone, and then they just kind of believe it. We've come to that day and age where social media seems to be giving us all the so-called real information, but really nobody's really looking into things here.
Well, I know a lot of people who are listening probably, have been convinced that wheat is a poison. And I did a debate with David Perlmutter, the author of Grain Brain, and we really banged the science back and forth on both sides. And it was a really great debate. And of course, my mother said I won that debate, so that tells you a lot right there. But what was interesting is at the end of the debate, David Perlmutter held up my book and said, you know what? He's right. It's about digestion. I choose to say people to not eat wheat. John chooses to help people be able to start digesting it again. So I really think that people haven't heard both sides of the argument. And before you take wheat out of your diet forever, 1% of the population are celiac, and they probably shouldn't ever eat wheat. But the other 40 million people who are gluten-free today, supporting a $16 billion a year industry. Just the fact that it's a $16 billion a year industry makes you think, is this really in my best interest that when we have a $16 billion a year industry now pumping gluten-free products, which are highly processed? It just doesn't really make any sense. And we have to wake up and go, wait a minute, they're about making money. This is an industry. They've never been in our best interest. The whole cholesterol thing was not in our best interest. That was a big mistake. The replacement fats they gave us, the vegetable oils, the cooked vegetable oils, which lowered cholesterol, but actually increased heart disease. That's what the polyunsaturated vegetable oils did to us, and they put them in foods as preservatives, and that has congested us to the point where they're directly linked to obesity, the diabetes, depression, and the breakdown of our digestive system, and now the $16 billion a year industry. And we're digging out of all that from that one crazy mistake to take cholesterol out of our diet because it supposedly caused heart disease, and it never did. And here we go again, taking wheat and grains out of our diet, which we've been eating for millions of years, saying because it causes Alzheimer's and wheat belly, and it really doesn't. And the science doesn't prove it at all. And here we go again. Are we doing the same thing? And that's why I got a little excited about it, because people don't realize that your digestive strength is your ability to detoxify. We have 4 billion pounds of toxic chemicals dumped in the American environment every year. There's mercury from the coal mine plumes on every organic vegetable. And when you eat organic, you're still eating mercury. And if you don't have good digestion, can say you can't eat wheat, or you feel bloated when you do that, indicates your digestion is probably a little not as wonderful as it could be. Therefore, your detoxifying ability is not as efficient as it could be, which means that mercury is going to go into your blood, into your fat, into your brain, and store in your tissues in your body. And down the road, 20, 30 years from now, cause real problems. So just taking wheat out of your diet might make you feel better right now, and fine, do it, but that's not the final solution. Let's fix the digestion, and then if you want, in season, in a whole grain form, break bread here and there in a moderate form, not 3 times a day, every day, in a processed form for 50, 60 years. That was a bad idea.
Right. That just makes a lot of sense. Well, Dr. John, can you give a website people can find out more about where to get your book and the things you're up to and what they can do next?
Yeah, the book is on Amazon, and you can go to my website for more information about that at lifespa, LIFESPA.com. It's lifespa.com, or to make it easier, eatwheatbook.com.
Well, very good. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Daniel.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can also discover more. Visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as upcoming programs. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.